State of the State. One of the most important races on the ballot this June in Clark County is going to be for sheriff. That's because our current sheriff, Joe Lombardo, is not seeking re-election. He wants to be Nevada's next governor. So who's going to take over? We haven't had a different sheriff for the last 8 years. There are 3 people contending for the top spot right now, but there is only one who is leading the pack to win this race. In fact, it's quite possible that he may have this race wrapped up in June by winning the primary. If he gets more than 50% of the vote, he is going all the way. And there's a precedent that's been set. Joe Lombardo himself did it 4 years ago. So who am I talking about? Kevin McMahill, and he is with me here today in studio, and it truly is an honor to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, you're not the typical politician. I don't think you've ever been on a campaign trail in your life, right?
Never. First time.
It's fun, isn't it?
Yeah. You know, it is fun in the sense that you get to meet a lot of really good people, but it's certainly a grind, and you don't want to be outworked. You got to be everywhere, talking to everybody on both sides of the aisle, because the sheriff's a nonpartisan race. So it's very long days, I'll tell you that.
Absolutely. So you announced, I believe it was in early 2021. It wasn't even, well, maybe you advanced at the end of 2021, correct?
Last June.
And you announced and you came out swinging with your first financial report where you had really outraised all of your competitors.
Yes, I did. Well, listen, I mean, politics is unfortunately part of the world that we have to play in, is that you have to raise a lot of money. They want me to raise for this particular race because of the TV buys and all the ads and all those kind of things. They want me to raise over $2.2 million. Today, I'm sitting at about $1.8 million, so I'm well on my way to that. But
wow.
Finances is absolutely a part of campaigning, no doubt. It's really strange, though, because it's $2.2 million for a job that pays about $160,000. It's pretty crazy, right?
It is absolutely insane. It just tells you how much TV commercials cost you.
Exactly.
It is absolutely ridiculous, and that's the crime right there.
Yeah, I wish you didn't have to raise all that money for sure.
I know, and it's awkward, isn't it?
It is very awkward.
No one understands how awkward it is to ask people that you know and have a relationship with for cash.
The only thing that makes it a little bit easier is I found out how important the sheriff's race is to so many people in this community that have come through to support my campaign. So that part has made me feel really good about running for sheriff and the reasons why I want to run for sheriff.
I think it's definitely one of the most important races on the ballot, and I want to get into the issues right away. But my first question, you might take a little bit of heat for this. Maybe you don't take much heat for it, but you kind of are the anointed one by Joe Lombardo. So I think there are some people who just assume that you're Joe Lombardo Part 2, but you are a totally different individual. One of the reasons why you and Joe worked so well is that you are very different from one another.
We are.
So I think one of the first questions we want to get out there is, how are you different from Joe Lombardo?
Well, aside from Joe Lombardo endorsing me, I have the endorsement of the last 3 sheriffs, going all the way back to Bill Young and then Doug Gillespie. And if you know any one of those 3 guys, you know they're all very, very different people, and so I'm very proud to have all their endorsements. Joe is a very analytical, numbers kind of guy. I'm much more of a people person. We worked really well together as a team. He came up on mostly the covert side of our organization, and I came up mostly in the uniform side of the organization. So we had 2 very different opinions on the way things that went. In fact, when Joe selected me as his undersheriff, I was a little bit surprised because we knocked heads so many times coming up throughout the ranks. But he's done a hell of a job as a sheriff. I'd like to say a lot of that came from counsel that I was able to give him as well. But I would say that's probably the biggest difference. Is I'm really a people person, really a strong believer in the community-oriented piece of this, and driving programs that are non-traditional within the police department.
Right. And I would agree. You two are very different in that respect. When he was here a few weeks ago, I kind of ribbed at him that I'd really never seen personality in him except on October 1 when he's crying. And then we were doing an interview here and he got a little mad at the end and he was like, oh, that just pisses me off. You don't see emotion from him ever. He's such a stoic man. Nothing wrong with it. But you definitely are the personality of the pair.
Well, I don't know about that. I've seen a lot of emotion from Joe over the years, but he's a very thoughtful guy, and he did it. Listen, there's no 2 law enforcement professionals in this country that were tested more than Joe Lombardo and I were in the last 6 years. No, there's nobody even close. And you can go all the way back to the Bunkerville cow incident with the Bundys and BLM, the assassination of Alan and Igor sitting at Cece's Pizza, and then the guys go next door to the Walmart and kill a civilian before our hero cops go in there and take care of business. 1 October, what people forget about is that aside from 58 people dying that day and 2 subsequent, 422 other people were shot with an AR-15 round. And, you know, it's hard to say that you feel proud of people when you've suffered that much loss, but I will tell you something. The men and women of your first responder community here trained together, worked together, and that night saved a lot of lives. If you've never seen the damage that an AR-15 does to a human body, I can tell you it's a miracle that 422 people survived that.
I know.
You know, and then, you know, people ask me about this COVID thing all the time. And, you know, one thing I would tell people about COVID is that I believe it was probably one of the largest leadership challenges that we've ever had to go through.
Yeah.
And here's why. 5 Metro police officers have died of COVID, 1 civilian employee. Over 3,000 of our members have had COVID. Everybody else closed down. Businesses were forced to shut down, government closed down, the rest of the criminal justice system closed down. Not our men and women. They had to go out there every single day knowing that they were being exposed, that their friends were dying, to protect you and me and our family and our community. And they did it every single day without complaint. I'm so proud of them for what they've done through that portion and that piece of my career. And then the last thing to add into all of that was we had the summer of unrest where we have a police officer murder George Floyd by kneeling on his neck for 9.5 minutes in Minneapolis. And then civil unrest spreads across this entire country. And law enforcement agencies all over this country failed. Portland and Seattle and San Francisco, Denver, the list goes on and on. Police chiefs turned their back on the men and women that were out there doing it. Elected officials turned their back on them. We protected everybody's right to come out here and protest. Rightfully so. It's a First Amendment protected right. They don't have a First Amendment protected right to riot. So when they turned to rioting, we took care of business. And yes, we lost 1 police car to arson and we had a few businesses damaged, but they didn't take over this city. And that's the beauty of having a strong sheriff in our community.
Absolutely. I covered everything you mentioned from, you know, the Bundy Ranch and on. And so no way is a journalist a first responder the way that you guys are. But we do see more. We do know more. We're on the front lines there with you. And I guess that's why I have so much respect for you and for Sheriff Lombardo, because I've seen you in the heat of it. And I've seen you in ways that other people haven't. And I think if everybody was able to get past behind the curtain and pull back the veil and see what it's really like, there would be far much more respect for the work that you guys have done, because I would agree with you. I think Metro is one of the best departments in the entire nation.
So do I.
And I think you've proven it time and time and time again. But that doesn't mean that there aren't criticisms, some fair, some not fair.
Sure. And
I want to talk about that because I mentioned this with Sheriff Lombardo as well. One of the things that really gets me kind of pissed, if you will, is this community loves to blame everything on Metro. You know, oh, crime's up, it's Metro's fault. This happened, it's Metro's fault. Yeah. Everywhere else in the country, they're blaming rogue DAs, criminals, you know, all sorts of things for why things are going wrong. Here, it's obviously, you know, your fault, which makes absolutely no sense to me. So crime has gone up, particularly since 2020, right? We can't deny that. Property crime is definitely up, and it's a huge concern for people. So how can you as sheriff address those concerns?
Well, I like to joke with the sheriff that crime went up as soon as I retired. But he doesn't like that too much. So.
Doesn't like that joke? Okay.
But no, it's true. I mean, look, we had the aftermath of COVID. COVID really sort of drove some strange crime where we saw a lot more children being killed. Those numbers increased dramatically. When the strip reopened, you know, we pretty much took us a while to get control of that strip because we'd had low rent room rates, and some of the riffraff was coming from Southern California up here, and you know, resorting to violence and all of those kinds of things. And so, one of the things that when you ask me differently between Joe and I is, what most leaders do when you see significant increases in crime is they double down on the enforcement effort. And I would put Metro's ability to enforce crime against anybody's. We still do see today, we have 356 people that are awaiting trial for murder. Many of those are still housed in the Clark County Detention Center. Many of those are out in our community with an electronic monitoring bracelet on. This is the crime of murder that I'm talking about, by the way. The oldest case that's sitting in the Clark County Detention Center is 7 years. So we have to make sure that we fix the rest of the criminal justice system as we move forward. But what you have to do really in this process is you have to double down on the community policing part of this, right? That's the simplest thing to walk away from because it takes time. You don't see immediate gratifying results by your arrest numbers or your stop numbers or those kinds of things. But one of the things about building authentic, deep, meaningful relationships in communities, particularly communities of color, pays dividends because you start to build trust. And then the people within those communities will start to partner with the police to tell you who the bad guys are and what they're doing. I know that because when I was the captain at Bolden Area Command, I reduced crime 1 year by 40%. I didn't get a single additional resource to me. In fact, I kept some of the specialized resources out of that area command. But I had that opportunity because I went in and developed partnerships with people we'd never had partnership with. To your point, crime is everybody's concern. It's not just a concern of the police. And so that's a huge part of what I'm going to do is we're going to further foster those relationships and develop those opportunities for us to lower crime in communities by developing those relationships and making meaningful change within those communities. Look, I know how to fight crime. 5 of the 6 years as I was an undersheriff, we were down in all Part 1 crime. Effective enforcement is a big part of that, but making sure that we have district attorneys that will prosecute, judges that will not let people out of jail for all myriad of offenses that we see people get house arrest for that there's no way they should be out on house arrest for. We're not talking about this low-level misdemeanor stuff that a lot of people are concerned with. I'm talking about violent felons that are making victims. They need to go to prison. There's a reason we still have a prison ministry. Even though we're involved with things like Hope for Prisoners, once they've served their time, they deserve every opportunity they can to have a hand out and a hand up and give an opportunity to go out and make something of themselves so they don't go back to jail. But all of that effort has to be focused from the entire organization towards making those relationships.
And we're lucky that Steve Wolfson is not one of those rogue DAs. He's nothing like Gascon, and he is tough on crime, and he is doing exactly what we need. And we hope that he's reelected because Ozzie Fumo is the opposite of that. So he would be, Fumo would be a part of this very progressive move that we're seeing from some liberals in the state. We saw it in the legislature. We see it in the county commission. And the county commission is important because they fund you about 70% of Metro's budget. So we do have this push from some folks who do want to take money away from police departments, who do want to say, well, that's just going to be a citation. We don't want to have, we don't want anyone to be, crimes, make everything a misdemeanor. Nothing's a felony. So we're seeing that happen all the time. So how are you going to combat that?
So I'm glad you brought this up because as we sit here today, the jail that Metro runs, the Clark County Detention Center, can house pre-COVID up to about 4,100 inmates. That jail today is the largest mental health treatment facility in the state of Nevada. It's the largest addiction treatment center in the state of Nevada and the largest homeless shelter in the state of Nevada. And there's people out there that are saying that I'm for the defund the police movement, which is absolutely not true. But those are really the 3 issues that they're talking about. We need to make it so that, and by the way, when my officers get in an officer-involved shooting, almost always one or all 3 of those things are involved in that officer-involved shooting. Mental health and addiction prevalent in almost every.
The guy wielding the sword,
exactly.
Remember him?
It happens all the time, right? So I don't want my cops to be the only response to mental health, addiction, and homelessness. I'm tired of it. I want the rest of government to do something about those 3 issues so that the only response is not to call 911 and have the police respond out to those incidents. Look, we're going to always be involved in those things. There is no doubt about it. But to have the jail the only thing that's taking care of those 3 largest, and by the way, poverty sits over the top of all of that, right? So all of these social issues that are failing, the only people right now in government that have a real responsibility to it is 911. Calling police and fire out to the scene.
Right, and I think the difference is we don't want some community advocate or, Child Protective Services out there trying to, I'll get in the middle of this gunfight. That's not what we're, someone's wielding a sword. You don't want some random person who knows nothing about this there. We want the proper facilities for mental health, the proper facilities to deal with the homeless. And we need that budget to be created, but not taken from Metro.
Don't take it away from the cops. We're already underfunded, undermanned, right? That's the fact. But we can fund these. Look, all the millions of dollars of money that's coming in with COVID cares. Are we talking about any one of those 3 issues? where we're going to spend that money to deal with mental health and addiction. As it comes today, we go in and we have people come in addicted to all kinds of drugs in that jail. And we have an entire process to wean them off of those drugs. We give them a shot or a patch before they go out back into the world to keep them off of heroin. 30 days later, that patch or that shot is no good. Guess where they can get it for free? The jail. So they reoffend, they go back, they go through the entire process again. Why don't we have this option out there? You know, there's some great things out there like Vegas Stronger with Dave Marlin. He's adopted a number of places that the calls go directly to him first and police last. There's some really great models out there. We have mental health professionals that respond with police on calls. All of that stuff needs to be expanded. We just can't leave it only solely responsible. We're already, you know, a jack of all trades as police, right? We're marriage counselors and we're all of these other things that we're really not qualified to do, and we need help in those areas. And as a sheriff, I'm going to push for us to make sure that we have additional resources in the community so that jail is not the only answer for all of those people.
And so let's talk about this from the funding perspective then as well, because I think if you're just a Las Vegan, or maybe you live in Henderson, anywhere in Clark County, one of your biggest frustrations as a resident is that everything goes to the Strip and nothing goes anywhere else. Now, I'm smart enough to know that part of that is a funding issue. Part of that is we need to keep the Strip safe because it's the entire state's bread and butter. So those things make sense. But as a regular resident, it's very frustrating when you call 911 on a weekend when somebody's having a crazy party, there's drunks everywhere, they're drinking and driving, and you call 911 and they're like, oh, that's a 311 issue, there's nothing we can do, and it's the weekend, so we'll get back to you on Monday. As a resident, that's so frustrating. So how do we get you guys the funding to combat that? Because I could ask you, how are you going to change that? And you're going to say, oh, more funding. Great answer. How do we get that, though?
Yeah, you know, I think we're really going to have a conversation about funding police in a completely different method. As you mentioned, we're funded by city, county, and property tax for the most part. There's a few other pieces that jump in there. But we have the addition of the Raiders, the Golden Knights, probably basketball and baseball here before very long. Our visitor volume is right back up through the roof again. And with all the addition of all of that, the new residents, all the other things that we have, we're not really talking about moving the needle on funding for public safety. So I think we're going to have, and I don't think people are ready for more property tax or any of those kinds of things. So I think we're really going to have to go back in and go back to the drawing board and bring some experts together to really figure out what that looks like. You know, we've survived on the 2 officers per 1,000 permanent residents ratio. You know, in major cities like Los Angeles, you're up to 4. In New York City, you're up to 6. It used to be 8. I think we need more cops, and I think we're going to have to figure out how to do that. I have a few ideas that are out there, but I really haven't got through vetting all of them and what is the right way to do it. But your point is that we have to have safety in our communities as much as we have to have safety on that economic engine of Las Vegas Boulevard. And I think we've done a pretty good job of balancing that over the years.
All right, let's talk about another public safety issue. So 2013, there was the fiery pimp strip shooting. That was a random.
Horrendous.
Then it was like 2 years later, right around Christmas, when Steve Harvey's like doing the Miss America pageant or whatever, that lady drove up onto the sidewalk, hitting pedestrians over on, God, that was Paradise or something. And then we also had the incident where like a rogue drunk driver, remember they rammed into the bus stop and killing a bunch of people who were sitting there. Those were like, oh man, our once a year incidents. I just listed them to you. Now it's like every month we've got someone driving the wrong way on the freaking freeway. You've got people who are running red lights. I know you can't stop people from doing bad things, but traffic has gotten a little ridiculous, right? Can we at least admit that?
Of course, yeah.
These accidents that are happening lately are people who are obviously, you know, drunk or on substances out of their freaking minds, but it makes it just so much unsafer for everyone.
It does.
Is there anything that can be done, or no?
No, listen, I think, well, that's a great question. Fatalities, you know, usually surpass the number of homicides that we have every single year. And I would say to you, one of the things I don't like about the way policing is handled today is we compile statistics, right? So if last year you had 138 homicides and you had 143 traffic fatalities, that just gives you a number. What we forget about all those numbers is that there's real lives behind every single one of those numbers, right? Those are mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers. And if you've ever lost anybody to an incident, whether it's homicide or fatality, you feel the exact same way. It's a loss. So this traffic issue, you know, we had the mass killing, really, in North Las Vegas, where that entire family was basically taken out by a guy who had been driving over 100 miles an hour and had previously been cited for it. I think the number I recently saw was there was 5,100 people ticketed for driving over 100 miles an hour, and they couldn't find any resolution throughout the court system for any single one of those tickets. So I think we have to go back in and really focus in on what those offenders are doing. But the other part is there's a lot of opportunity, I think, from the engineering perspective, and I think we've got to put some more money into that. I'll give you this example. If you go drive down Maryland Parkway right in front of UNLV, used to be one of the worst areas for us to have traffic fatalities when I first hired on in 1990. They installed these new crosswalks now that have the flashing lights, and it's very apparent that there's somebody in it because you have to stop. We don't really have fatalities along that area. So when you're looking at, you know, wrong way entry onto a freeway, you have to be pretty screwed up to do that in the first place, right?
Yes,
but secondly, there should be all kinds of things showing, not just one little sign saying wrong way. There's ability to put lights up and a number of other different things so that maybe you stop somebody from doing that. But again, in most of those cases, you see either mental health or substance abuse involved in the drivers of those vehicles.
Right.
We've got to do a better job of it.
We absolutely do. So one of the disadvantages of being a journalist all these years is that there's just stories that haunt me, and I'm guaranteed there are things that haunt you. Like, I can't go into a CC's Pizza. I can't do it anymore, right? And recently over Christmas, there was an incident at Fashion Show Mall that now has made me freaking terrified every time I'm there. And that, you know, there was old lady who was shot, you know, because somebody wanted to rip her off.
Yeah.
You know, if we were in New York and you were like the mayor of New York, you would blame this all on guns, you know, and Joe Biden would come to town and he would say, oh, it's because there's all these illegal guns on the street. That is not why crime is happening. It's not because of illegal guns. It's because of people using these guns. So is the way to combat this so that the Strip and just everywhere becomes a lot safer, is the answer just more cops, more cops, more cops, more cops?
No, I don't think it's more cops because, you know, I give you an example. When I was the Bolden area commander, we had a particular housing neighborhood that was challenged in fact, it was sort of ground central for the Rodney King riots that we had here back in the 90s. And that's one of the places that I couldn't believe what was going on. There was so much loss of life. And I talked to what we call an OG, original gang member, and I stopped him out there and I said, hey, you need to help us with this. You guys, we got to do something about this. And he said to me, and I'll clean it up for TV, but basically, I don't care how many MF and cops you send down here, every time you go around the corner, we're going to shoot this place up. And I realized he was right. So the answer is not a cop on every corner because crime can still continue. I think, and I agree with you, by the way, I don't think it's the fact that guns are, you can have a CCW or you can be open carry. I think that the problem is that we need to really focus back in on taking care of those offenders that we catch and making sure they're prosecuted, because we know there's a very small handful of people that commit most of this crime. How many times have you seen that we arrest somebody for whatever case it is, and they've got a rap sheet that's 100 miles long and they never went to prison, or they never have been held accountable for any of those things? We've got to do a better job at focusing in on those places. Fashion Show Mall was another one. We lost control of it for a while. I heard from a number of the people that own businesses there. We've been working on it. You know, it's a partnership between security and police, and the visibility of that, lighting, a number of different things that we're really trying to work on in all of those areas. But it's a combination of all of those things, I think.
Okay, that's fair. A lot of what you're saying, though, is about making sure that we're doing better deterrence over just citations and really making sure people are held accountable. That is really going to fall, though, on the Nevada State Legislature to basically write better laws. So are you going to be a big advocate in the legislature to make this happen? Because we kind of lost control in the last session.
Yeah, I think the sheriff of Clark County needs to have a very active role up in the legislature, advocating for the types of laws that need to be passed.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's talk a little bit about body cams. As journalists, I freaking love them, because when you've got the freak show with the samurai sword coming after the cop, like, that video is freaking gold. But body cam video serves a lot of purposes, and it protects cops, and it also keeps us all aware. So what's your stand on those?
Greatest thing that's happened to law enforcement in my career. You know, when we were trying to push the body-worn cameras to our officers, there was a lot of resistance to those. We tried trials and a number of other things, and as you know, we had to negotiate into contract to get them to wear them for all uniformed officers. I spoke to nearly every police officer while I was the undersheriff who was involved in an officer-involved shooting, and all of them were grateful that it was captured on that camera. There were a couple there was one officer that was under fire over off of Paradise, and he bailed out of the car, didn't get the camera on, and his officer-involved shooting happened. The first thing he said to me when I talked to him, he said, "Sir, I just didn't have time to get the body-worn camera on. I wish it would have been on so it would have captured that." There's also thousands of police officers who've been cleared of allegations of misconduct or you know, inappropriate language or whatever it is that they want to say. We tell people when they come in, we're going to go pull the body-worn camera. Oh, he did that or she did that. You play the camera and you know it doesn't show it. And so, you know, it's when it comes to transparency on our organization, accountability on our organization, you know, we're still one of the only police departments in this country that 72 hours after an officer-involved shooting, I did them for years myself, but you go out and we play those body-worn cameras. We play other videos. I have to tell you kind of an amusing story about that is when we first started doing it, law enforcement across the state was very angry at me. There was a DA from up north that said I was violating judicial canon of ethics rules and doing all kinds of other things by having the DAs release these things. And we knew, though, that when you look at cases all over the country, what causes problems between cops and communities is we hide this stuff. And, you know, being a journalist yourself, you know, over the years, when we're open and transparent about what it is that occurred, people make their own decisions. Look, most of us sit there and watch those videos and we go, oh, I would have shot him too, or I wouldn't have shot him. Oh my God, what did they do? You know, we see it from an administrative perspective where we're looking at leadership, supervision, policy, training, tactics, all of those things where, boy, we can do better here. But you're looking at it from a lawful perspective. Did that guy need to be shot or not? And those cameras are an absolute gem for our organization, and I think all cops should have them.
Transparency is the only way you can truly feel secure in
Yeah.
any society, in any relationship.
That's a good point.
If you are in a marriage and you don't have transparency, you don't know what your spouse is doing, you're always doubting where are they at, what's going on. The same goes with the community.
Yeah.
So I feel like with the police, you have to have total transparency, and I think that's what body cams offer. So that's awesome to hear about that. Another thing I wanted to know how you felt about bail and bonds. There's a lot of push to get rid of bail. To make sure that, because they say that it's an unfair system and that if you're poor, you're stuck in jail for a lot longer, and maybe if you're a person of color, you're stuck there a lot longer. I get there's some, you know, Fourth Amendment due process things there with that, but overall, getting rid of bail or bonds is extremely alarming to me. How do you feel about that issue?
You know, from my perspective, I think that and I think there is some validity to some of these arguments, right? Is you go in and you go to the jail and you're being processed. Let's just give you an example of an individual who has a probation violation, right? They didn't show up on time, or maybe they smoked a little bit of weed or whatever it is. Which weed's legal. Why do we violate somebody for that now? So now they go back to jail, and then typically they stay in jail for 30 days before the hearing that says, hey, make sure you show up on time to your probation officer next time. These kind of status offense things that you're going to lose your house or your apartment, you're going to lose your car, you're going to lose your job. Any one of us would lose all of those things. And sometimes it's no fault of their own. And so I don't agree with removing bail for violent crimes and crimes that have victims. In my personal opinion, those types of things are the things that when you have a real live person that has been harmed by another person, those people have to be held accountable. And, you know, there's options out there that judges are using today to do electronic monitoring and a number of other things. In fact, when I first started as the undersheriff, we had less than 200 people on electronic monitoring, but so many have been released that there's over 1,200 today on electronic monitoring. So, you know, I think there's options within that system, and I think there needs to be a robust discussion around that, because the only thing you ever hear about when you talk about criminal justice reform really is police reform. Police have been reforming for years and years and years, but the rest of the system has not kept up. I mean, the statistics I gave you on a murder, 356 people in jail for murder. The system is broke that we have that many people awaiting trial for murder, right? And that doesn't talk about any of the other major offenses, sexual assault and rape and robbery and all those kinds of things. So we've got to do a better job, and we've got to have a lot better conversation around that. And as a sheriff, I intend to do that.
Right. It's more that situation in Minnesota where the guy like ran through that holiday parade or whatever, and he had just gotten out, didn't have the bail, and he had a rap sheet that was pretty horrible. We can name those type of experiences all over the country. I think that's where it's infuriating.
Yeah, it is.
I don't think anybody should have to get bail for traffic tickets, but you know, so I think there is a difference. But protecting that is so important. I guess that brings me to one of, as we're getting ready to wrap up, I am totally blown away by this. In the summer of unrest, as you call it, there honestly wasn't that much unrest here in the Las Vegas Valley. Minnesota was on fire. Seattle had a freaking chop zone, Chaz, chop, whatever you want to call it, crazy. New York, Los Angeles, so much unrest, so much chaos. Come here to Las Vegas, before George Floyd even happened, Metro changed its policies on how it was going to be dealing with people. We would have riots, and we would have the demonstrations, and it got a little dicey there at night. But we didn't see any of the mass looting, the mass burning things down that we did elsewhere. I attribute that to Metro. People say I'm so biased, blah, 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 blah.
No, you're right.
But I do attribute it
to
Metro 100%, because that's the only reason it didn't get out of control.
Yeah, like I said, we lost one car to arson. But when they, you know, look, Sheriff Lombardo and I stood out there with our men and women and took frozen water bottles, rocks, and batteries, and we used gas for the first time since the Rodney King riots. That's no small feat, right? They changed their tactics every night, and so did we. And that's why we didn't have any. Look, it was dangerous enough that Shea McMahill is shot and laying in a wheelchair and will never
have his
a great
life
quality
back.
of life back again. We also shot a man on the courthouse steps shortly thereafter. And so it was very dangerous. It was a very difficult time for all of us. But you can't let riotous behavior take over a city. And those cops didn't want to go out there and deal with that every single night, but they did it.
So what did you guys do that was so different from the way they responded in Minneapolis and Seattle? What was the difference?
Well, I think the biggest difference is that in 1973, Metro became Metro after joining the city and county police departments. They had the wisdom to put an elected sheriff over the head of our organization. Every other one, I know all those other leaders, by the way, and all those cities that I mentioned that failed, but everybody runs the police department except for the police chief. Here, the sheriff is accountable to the people that elected him. He doesn't have to ask for permission to use tactics or to use a number of different things that we used during those riots. And we didn't have to go through a mayor, a commission, or a council to get permission to do any of those things. It was up to the sheriff and myself to make the decisions out on the scene when we made them. And we made them so that we didn't let them take over the freeway, didn't let them burn buildings down. They tried to burn an Arco down over off of Las Vegas Boulevard. They tried to, break into a bunch of different buildings. They tried to break into the courthouse. We didn't let them do it.
The county commission didn't really work in your favor, though, because they were trying to pass certain ordinances, if you will, so that you could have the backpack full of, crap with you while you were there. And you had a lot of people in the legislature pushing things to make it more difficult. So you were really fighting against the very people who do make the rules and the laws. Was that hard?
Well, listen, people don't understand the whole backpack thing, right? We're finding fireworks and IEDs, homemade bombs, hammers, all kinds of things that they're bringing to these riots that are going to really hurt people. And so, yeah, that wasn't the best, but we adapted and overcame like we always do as a police department. And I'm really proud of the way that we handled those. People said we were firing rubber bullets. We don't even have a rubber bullet at Metro. Look, I'm not going to give you all of the things that we did on TV, but I will tell you this. We had very good intelligence. We paid attention to what they were doing and where they were going, and we made sure that we took out the most violent of those people within those crowds as early and as often as we could.
Well, and that is commendable on so many levels, and I appreciate it. And even if the folks at home, some who watch this, go, I don't appreciate it, in honesty they do, because for the most part we are in one of the biggest cities in the world that have the most visitors in the world, and generally for the most part we're always a very, very safe and secure place. One thing that I know both of us are very passionate about, so I want to end on kind of a positive note, prison reform. You have been such an advocate for prison reform and for hope for prisoners. And everybody always talks about this when they go to a graduation. You have these experiences where people who were incarcerated, who freaking hate you at one point in their lives, hate you. Every time you're mentioned, go, that's my friend. The police, that's our friend. What you guys have been able to do, this relationship that Hope for Prisoners and Metro have fostered, has changed the game across the country.
Isn't it magical?
Phenomenal.
It's magical, yeah. It really is. It's you know, I'll tell you, when I first met John, I had already talked to a whole bunch of other people that were working in this prison reform space, and honestly, I didn't see that they had helped a single person. So when John approached me, I was kind of skeptical, and then we sort of grew that thing, and we started having police officers work as mentors to returning offenders, and now they graduate at Metro headquarters. And the stories that you will hear from those people that are coming back from prison will literally cause you to cry every single time.
Yeah.
It's and look, the other stories that come out of it, right? This is not just we're feeding somebody that got out of prison right back into the same neighborhood with no hope, no ID, no job, no, right? This program is actually giving these people the first time, for many of them, the opportunity to feel loved, right? To feel like they belong to something, that they don't want to fail, which is why over 90% of them don't go back to prison ever again. They become law-abiding, productive members of our community. They're not locked up in these places anymore. And so, you know, that means that they're a father to their children, or a husband to their wife, or vice versa, you know, all of these things. And then, you know, there's so many unbelievable stories to relate to you. But one of the first ones I heard was there was a guy that was driving around on the bus, and he was thinking about reoffending, and because he really hadn't had any luck in the job market. And he sees a car crash in the middle of an intersection where a police officer was involved in this car crash. And he stopped the bus, he jumped off the bus, and the police car was starting to catch on fire, and he went over there and pulled the police officer out of the car. Now, this is a guy who had just spent 10 years in prison, went through this program, and he saw this cop as a human being, right? Because that's the basis of where we all got to get back to. That I don't see you as a woman and you see me as a man. That was the first thing we recognize is we're all human beings, no matter what. No matter what our past experiences were, we all deserve an opportunity. And so I'm extremely proud of that program. And, you know, we have so many cops. It was hard to get cops to work as mentors initially.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
That was a tough sell. But they're so enthusiastic about it. They love it. And I think it's another one of those things that you don't get immediate gratification from, but the numbers are growing and building. People that would have normally looked at us as their enemy, thousands of them now look at us as their friend and demonstrate it regularly.
The dividends grow. And do you think in some respect that has also helped make Las Vegas a safer community?
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. I mean, you look at recidivism on any other organization or any other state, the number is completely flip-flopped. It's 90% of them are going back to prison. We're keeping these people out. We're giving them meaningful wage-paying jobs, giving them that, like I said, that love for the first time. And boy, isn't it amazing, though? I know you've been involved for a very long time, but just to watch that transformative change on the face and then to hear it as it spills out of their hearts, it's I always call it magical.
It truly, truly is. And it has changed my opinion on prison and prison reform a million times over. The person I was before I moved to Nevada to the person I am today has very, very different views on this particular issue.
Yeah.
Just because, as you can imagine, being in news, I've spent some time in prison,
Yeah.
not as a
Yeah.
regular, but a visitor, and I didn't always have the best, opinion, and was kind of critical. But that has definitely changed a lot. And I think one thing that people don't really understand about the job that you do is that prison is a scary place.
Yeah.
And in fact, being a cop is really scary. I remember when I was on a ride-along once in Louisiana, not here, and high-speed chase happened. I really shouldn't have been in the car. I was in the car. They're telling me to get down. I'm like, I gotta run a camera. You know, your life kind of flashes before your eyes. Bad things happen, and it's a scary, scary job. It's scary to be in the prisons, scary to be a correction officer, scary to be there on the front lines every single day.
Still the best job on the planet, though. There are moments that it is scary. There's no doubt about that. But I tell you what, when you, I have a son and a son-in-law on the job. I'm pretty sure you knew my wife was a retired deputy chief, and you get to go to work and make a difference every single day. Sometimes it's a small difference. Other times it's a huge difference. But it is the most rewarding job, I think, that exists. And I'm grateful to the men and women that do it. We need more, so we're still recruiting. We're way down, about 250, so come on down.
Let's talk about that for a hot sec, too. You do need more, absolutely. And some people argue that recruitment has taken a hit because of just the way people view police now. Some people like to blame a lot of COVID and the fact that there was this vaccine mandate. When you're in this spot, what are you going to do to help recruitment, and how do you feel about that whole mandate thing?
Yeah, there's not going to be a mandate when I'm the sheriff. I think we have to do a better job recruiting locally. Everybody tends to focus outside. You know, we're bringing our cadet program back, and that's that bridge between the time you graduate from high school until you're 21 and eligible to be a police officer. That was always a great pipeline for us. Partnerships with various different high schools that cater towards, like, I can't remember the name of it all of a sudden, but there's a high school that does police, fire, EMS, a number of those kind of things. I don't know why it's escaping my head. My own son went there. But, you know, these opportunities to really get into a number of these schools, and, you know, even things like historic black colleges and a number of those kinds of things that we can really recruit from, because, you know, it is true that the intent is to try to look like your community. The biggest area where we don't look like our community, though, is in females, and then second, followed by Hispanics. So we've got to do a better job of that, and I can attest to the value that women bring to law enforcement. They really help a lot of situations because they tend to try to resolve something through talking rather than through action, which has helped us in our de-escalation policies and moving things forward as we've done that. So I think we just need to refocus back locally and grow that talent from here and get them invested in their police department early so that they want to become part of that police department.
Absolutely, and you've got some amazing female cops
We do.
On duty who are heading up some of the area commands who are just, you know, rock stars. They're not to bring up, you know, negative things, but there will be people who say, "Oh, I can't believe, Michelle, that you didn't ask about this." So we'll ask about. We'll get it out of the bag. You know, there was this article that came out that made a lot of accusations from many years ago that kind of make this insinuation that maybe you're disrespectful to women. You were completely cleared. There was no wrongdoing. You can ask Stavros. Everybody knows what we're talking about, right? I think things like that came out because there's people who are angry and there's people who like to destroy quality people and quality candidates, and we see this all the time. And they go after the front runner because that's what they do, and that makes a salacious story. Yeah. And no one else is bringing up sex in the squad car or any of the other junk that's going on with maybe some of your opponents. And now people are like, "Oh my God, what does she know?" Don't you wish you did know what I know? But it's kind of ridiculous and sad that stuff comes up, huh?
I expected it, quite honestly. I think I've told this story once or twice. My opponent that put all of this stuff out there in the media, he had asked me about 5 or 6 years ago in my office if I was ever going to run for sheriff. And I said, nah, because if I was my opponent, I would bring all this stuff up and try to, and I didn't have thick skin at the time. Well, I toughened up over the years, and I didn't do anything wrong. The reason I was cleared was the person who alleged all of these things happened recanted the story completely.
Right.
Of course, they don't post any of this stuff. They just post the original stuff that says that I'm a terrible person. And I have all that, and I have a whole lot of other stuff. But I think voters are smart enough also to figure out who I am and what I've done for them for the last 30 years. And, you know, I may choose to put some of that out and come back, or I may not. I don't really know. At this point, it's not really affecting me because people know me. I've been here for this community for a long time. You want to know how women at Metro think about me? Ask any one of them that you run across.
Right.
They're all behind me, 100%. They'll tell you all of the great things that I did for them for my entire 30-year career. I also have 3 daughters and a wife that was a deputy chief at Metro. So respect women. I respect women as much as any other person on this planet. And look, dirty politics is exactly what that is. They think that people are going to shrink up and go away. I'm not shrinking up and going away because I know I'm the best person to be the next sheriff in this town.
100%. I've known you a long time, and I will echo that a million times over. And it stinks that that's what politics has come today, of trying to damage people's reputations. And one of the things I like about you so much, just as a human being, is that you are that bigger person. Yeah. And you're like, you know what, I could go put some stuff out there too, but you know you don't have to. Yeah. And you know it's not worth it. And that is something that I think should be applauded as well. So.
Well, you know, you've run for office once or twice before, right?
I know. Yeah.
People just like to take shots at the one that's going to win.
They do. They love to take shots at the one who's going to win. And they also love to just throw anything out there, whether it's true or not, because they just don't care. And they will love to disparage someone's reputation.
Isn't it funny how people can just put something out there in social media today and a certain number of people will believe it?
And isn't it funny how within politics it's completely protected?
Oh, yeah.
That you can just be like, well, I don't know. I heard he dresses like a woman on the side. Blah, blah, blah. And you're like, where's your proof? Oh, nowhere. It's not true. I just put an asterisk there that it said, oh, said by Joe Blow on the corner of Washington and Fifth. It just makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And so it's not a very fair world that we live in, but hopefully justice will prevail. Well, I hope that people got to know you a little bit more through this, because I think it's important to know who the chief law enforcement officer really is. And for Clark County, that is you. And for whatever reason, during the COVID era, cops just got a really bad name, and I think we can do a lot to change that. I guess one other question that I wanted to ask that I just remembered and I forgot. There's some people who get mad at the way Metro handled things during COVID, saying, well, I wish he was more like the sheriff over in Riverside, California, because he was such a strong proponent of, like, I'm not going to do that. If you know the temperament and personality of Joe Lombardo, he was never going to be on TV every day the way that guy was. He was not that type of communicator. No. They're two different. It doesn't mean that they stray differently in what they believe and think and enforce. It's just one's a TV guy and one's not. Who are you going to be?
Well, listen, I was on TV a lot. I mean, while Joe was the sheriff, I was pretty much the
more than him. Yeah.
Metro spokesman. I believe the sheriff needs to be out there for the men and women. Some of this stuff that some of these sheriffs do, I don't know that that's really the position for the sheriff to be out advocate. Look, I'm a firm believer in the Constitution and all the things and the rights that it provides to all of us. Sometimes I think that some sheriffs will take the elected position that they have and put themselves into places that maybe they don't necessarily belong. We don't make law. Right? That's the legislators that do that. I think we have an opportunity to have conversations around all of that, but I don't think I'm going to go beyond what the mandates are for the sheriff's office, but I will definitely be more public about what it is that I do.
We cleared up in the Joe Lombardo interview as well a lot about the whole sanctuary city policy and how that had a lot, not so much to do with Metro itself as it did with things that city and lawsuits and things that were happening, governing bodies, whether it was the legislature or the city, really hamstringing you guys. And so I don't know if you get asked this a lot, but I know viewers will wonder, you know, are you going to make us a sanctuary city? And I think I know the answer, but you're going to continue to do everything you can, right?
Yeah. So listen, I mean, the one thing that a lot of those sheriffs that you hear out there talking about are these sheriffs that are talking about, you know, closed borders. We're not a border state, number one. We are affected by immigration, no doubt about it. What I will tell you is that if you're a criminal and you're illegally here, you need to be worried about Metro. Other than that, don't be worried about it, because look, my job, my cops are running from call to call to call every single day, violent crime and all the other things that we've already talked about. We don't have time to go out and be the federal law enforcement, immigration police. We don't have time to do it. Do I want it to stop? Yes. But we don't have time to go out and do the federal government's job. They need to get their act together is really what it comes down to on a federal level. But these are all difficult.
We need to fund ICE instead of keep trying to abolish it.
The bottom line is that it's not a local law enforcement issue.
Yeah.
It really isn't. Crime is a local law enforcement issue. And if you're here illegally and you're committing crime, we're going to come for you. There's no doubt about that.
There you go. All right. This has been just a great interview. I hope people have learned a lot, and I really appreciate you giving us this time to really let everyone get to know you a little bit better on a personal
I really
level.
enjoyed myself as well, and thank you for having me on, and hope people got to know me a little better as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, and thank you for joining us as well. As you know, we are bringing you all of the candidates who are running here in the great state of Nevada so that you're informed and you can make the best decisions come primary day. Remember, we here in Nevada are battle born, and it's shows like this one that make us battle ready. Until next time, I'm Michelle Mortensen.